All right, welcome back to Science 10 at Center High. Today we're going to talk about properties of matter, physical and chemical properties. A property is essentially something that we use to describe what something is like. We're going to start with physical properties. Physical properties are going to describe how something looks and a little bit about what it can do. Some physical properties to start with. The first one you're going to put on here is boiling point. The boiling point of a material is a physical property. One thing that I would encourage you to think about with regard to physical properties is it's something that you can do to describe how a substance looks or how it acts without having it react with a different substance. So it's just that substance by itself. If you heat something up, the temperature at which it turns from a liquid to a gas, that's its boiling point, or the other direction from a gas to a liquid, if it's cooling down, that's condensing over here, that's a physical property. For example, water's boiling point is at 100 degrees Celsius. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. It also condenses at 100 degrees Celsius in the opposite direction if you're at sea level. Water, when it changes from liquid water to steam, is still water. Chemically, it's the same. It still has an oxygen and two hydrogens. Even if it's in a gas form or a liquid form, it's still water. This here is my water molecule. If I boil it, it's still water. Similarly, the melting point, or you can think of it as the freezing point, of a substance is another physical property. For water, this is at 0 degrees Celsius. When water becomes ice, it's still chemically the same. It's a physical change. It has gone from a liquid to a solid, but it's still water. Two physical properties that are important for metals, which we will discuss in a different lesson, are malleability and ductility. So malleability is the ability to be rolled or bent without crumbling. Something like a metal can be rolled into a thin sheet. I've got some metals here. This is a strip of silver. Open it a little bit away from the mic. It's pretty tarnished now, so it's a pretty black. Oh wow, that's coming off on my fingers pretty good there. Let me pull out a strip of zinc instead. Be a nicer one to look at. I've got a strip of zinc here. That's a little bit better. Okay, zinc. Let me find that camera. Perfect. This is a strip of zinc. It can be rolled into a thin sheet, and it can be bent, and it doesn't just snap. If I do that with a pencil lead, which I didn't bring with me, it would just snap in half. I couldn't just take it and bend it. Instead, it would just crumble, it would just snap. This, however, is a malleable substance, so I can bend it around, and it's been rolled really tight, really thin, by squeezing it really tight. That's where I was going with that. If I was really strong, then I could try and pull this, and it would also stretch. And that's our next characteristic. That is ductility. Ductility. If a material is ductile, it can be stretched without breaking. Think of wires. Copper wire, for example, is very ductile. That's a physical property. You can stretch copper wire out into a long, thin wire without it breaking. You would not be able to do the same thing to a block of ice if you had it. The color, the physical color of a substance, is a property. So what color of light does it reflect? And what colors of light does it absorb? That's a physical property. There's not much else to write here. We'll just write color on the other side as well. The state of matter. This is related to the boiling point and melting point, but the state of matter of a substance at a specific temperature is a physical property. So, for example, if you are at 100 degrees Celsius, then water is turning into a gas, but a piece of iron will still be solid. That state of matter tells you something about its physical properties. This next one here is solubility. This vocabulary word, solubility, is the ability of a substance to dissolve. Something important here, we don't touch on this a lot in Science 10, but this, if you take chemistry later on down the road, solubility is specific to the thing dissolving and also what you're dissolving it in. So a substance might not be soluble in water, but it could be soluble in oil. And the difference in solubility is a physical property. The crystal structure of a substance, the crystal structure is another physical characteristic of physical property of a substance. If you've ever grown salt crystals, for example, they're going to form these block shapes, and that's a physical property of the type of crystals they form. If you've seen ice crystals form or like snowflakes form, it's a different shape. Conductivity. Conductivity. Conductivity is the ability to conduct heat or electricity. If you're sitting in a chair that has metal legs, go ahead and grab that metal leg right now. You'll notice it feels cold. It feels cold because that metal, one of its physical properties, is it's conductive. It will conduct heat away from your hand. Metals also conduct electricity pretty well. You build a wire out of metal, but if you tried to run a current through a plastic table, for example, that's what I have right in front of me, it's not going to run through as well. Similarly, if I put my hand on a piece of plastic, it's not going to feel quite as cold as the metal because it's not quite as conductive. That's a physical property. Another property is magnetism. It's a physical property because something can be attracted to a magnet or be pulled on by a magnet, attract other objects without it changing its actual chemical structure. It's a physical property. Take a look at these pictures here. Here's an example of a couple of different properties here. What you see here, this is a paperclip. It's made out of a material that is malleable. This material is malleable. This demonstrates the physical property of malleability because this piece of metal could be bent and formed into this shape without breaking. It's also in like a long, I have made a mistake. That's okay. We learn from mistakes. Actually, the easier way to do this, if you've been writing with me, I apologize. We're going to move this over here. This is malleability because we are rolling it and compressing a piece of metal very thin in a sheet, just like that piece of zinc that I held up. Sorry, my mistake. This, however, has been stretched into like a wire. You know, you could use it, if you wrote malleability here, maybe you've erased it twice now. But if you wrote malleability here, that's okay, but this also shows ductility because it's been stretched into this wire shape, but it's also been bent around. Over here, what you're looking at, what we're trying to show you in this picture is solubility. So in this vial here, it looks like a clear, homogeneous solution because it looks like one thing. In this vial here, you can see the different parts. This is something that is soluble. This is something that's not very soluble. So this is demonstrating solubility. Over here, this is demonstrating this is a solution that is conducting electricity. This is a solution that is not. So this is demonstrating the property of conductivity. In this case, specifically, electrical conductivity. Not all properties are physical properties, there are also chemical properties. This is going to describe how a substance reacts with other substances. So there's always something else involved, and chemical properties often involve whether or not something will combine with a different chemical. For example, you have how flammable, you can have flammability. Flammability. Is a substance flammable? Can it react in a combustion reaction? So something that is flammable would be like a piece of paper. That can react to combustion reaction. Water is not very flammable. Related to flammability is something called flash point. Flash point is the temperature needed for it to ignite in flame. That's a chemical property. It's related to flammability. I read a book in school for English class called Fahrenheit 451. It was called Fahrenheit 451 because of the temperature needed to ignite paper, and that was significant to the story of the book. But the title is based on the flash point, the chemical property of that paper. Okay, excellent. Down here, you can have a chemical property. It would be, will this react with air? Will it react with oxygen? So we're just going to write reactivity with oxygen. Does this chemical rust? Does it react with air? Does it corrode? Does it tarnish? The piece of silver I pulled out of the bag earlier made my fingers like a different color because it had tarnished. It had been covered in silver rust. And actually I'll show it to you, but inside the bag here, silver, as I'm sure you know, is a silver color. But if you're looking at this bag here, I've got this black thin piece of metal because the whole surface of the silver has reacted with air over time. It's an old piece of silver and it has tarnished. That is a chemical property of silver. It reacted with oxygen. All right. You could have reactivity. With acids/bases. More on that later. Some materials will react to corrode, or sometimes they'll form bubbles if they react with other materials like these. Can also have reactivity with heat. If you heat up the substance, will it melt or will it decompose? Melting, okay, something to be considered here. We are looking at this word more. Decomposing means to breaking apart. Melting, I'm actually going to get you to cross that out because that's a little confusing to think of this. Melting point is a physical change. If something melts and it changes from a solid to a liquid, that's a physical change. But if you heat something up and it actually changes substance, which happens, if you heat up baking soda, it's actually going to release gas because it decomposes. It breaks apart. That's a chemical property. Just melting to become a liquid, not a chemical property. Finally, this is somewhat similar to reactivity with acids and bases, but this is reactivity with indicators. more on this later on in the course. We'll talk about how indicators can tell you if something is acidic, if something is basic, or if something is neutral, and also what those terms mean. So don't worry too much about it now. Just know that the chemistry of an acid or a base is a chemical property of it, not a physical one. Identify the physical and chemical properties in the following sentence. Iron is very magnetic. It has a tendency to rust in air and bubbles when placed in hydrochloric acid. And here is supposed to be images of each of those things. So this is a magnet attracting iron nails. This is an iron nail having been left in the air. And this is an iron nail placed in hydrochloric acid. And you can see, if it will let me zoom in, that there are some bubbles on the surface. My guess is this one has water and this one has hydrochloric acid. Take a minute, write down what you think it is. Magnetism is going to be a physical property. This is physical. Because the iron doesn't actually change chemical composition as it is attracted towards the magnet, the nails are still nails. But here, when the iron has gone from this clean nail to this rusted nail, it's changed. You can't easily unrust that nail. This is a change in the chemical composition, so this is a chemical property. Reactivity with oxygen, whereas this one over here is a physical property. And finally over here, would be an example of reactivity with acid. This is also a chemical property. Yes, in this example, the iron is attracted to the magnet, so it does have to do with the iron interacting with another substance, but the iron doesn't change to become not iron. So that's a physical property. Versus over here, this iron has changed and this iron has changed. They're no longer just, there's been a change in the chemical composition of the iron. Therefore, this demonstrates a chemical property of iron. Thanks for joining. That's all for this lesson.